back to the Perspectives in Rural Education podcast. This is episode 3, and today we are excited because we have the Neoga Superintendent Bill Fritcher on the podcast. So welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brianna.
We're so excited to talk to you. I have so many questions. So let's just dive right in. And I would love to know when you first decided you wanted to go into rural education.
Well, when I decided I wanted to go into education, I was probably in high school. Did some work as a basketball referee my junior and senior year. Really liked being around the kids, and decided I wanted to do that. So I started college right after high school and went to Concordia College in River Forest. That didn't last very long. I wasn't the best student in the world and wasn't quite prepared. So I entered the work world for about 3.5 years. And when it was time for me to go back to college, I knew exactly what it was I wanted to do, and education was it for me. There were really no other choices.
Yeah, very cool. So you realized in high school that you wanted to go into education.
I did, yes.
And you, correct me if I'm wrong, you were a first generation college student, right?
I am a first generation college student. I come from a family of 7 children. I'm right in the middle, 3 older, 3 younger. And neither one of my parents had attended college, and none of my siblings up to that point had graduated from college. So yes, I was a first generation college student. Correct.
Okay, so what was that like? Was that transition hard?
A little bit difficult. However, my wife of 33 and a half years came from a family of teachers, and she and I were dating at the time. And so really she helped me navigate a lot of the college experience and the application process. And her mother was a guidance counselor. So that was a tremendous help to me in getting me through that college the first time. Yes.
Okay. Because you met her during that period of when you were working in the workforce, right?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
I was in the workforce and living in Altamont, which is my hometown. And she was teaching there and coaching 3 sports. And my little sister was playing softball for her. And she said, "You need to call that Miss Kruger." And thankfully I did.
That is awesome. Wow. I was going to ask you how you guys met because I love hearing those stories.
My mom was actually the bus driver for that softball team, and she was giving me the same nudge to make that call as well. So it worked out pretty well for me.
That is awesome. Wow. So when you returned to college, you went to Lakeland first, right?
Yes, I did. Went to Lakeland for about 1.5 years. Didn't finish my associate's degree, but I was far enough along that it was time to transfer on over to Eastern, and did my 2 years at Eastern, and went from there. But it was some of the best decisions of my life were made at that time. Also,
was it hard to go back to school, or were you so set on going back to school that it wasn't a hard decision?
Well, it was difficult in that I had moved out of my parents' house and I had my own place, and I had to basically go back to my mom and dad and said, "Hey, listen, this is what I want to do with my life. I'm ready to go back to school, and I'd like to be able to move back home." And my parents said, "We will absolutely open you with, we'll welcome you in our home again. Please come back as long as you're in school. But as soon as school is over, then it's, you're out on your own again." And that tough love was important. It really helped me. I had some financial assistance at the time because of my age. I was regarded as an independent student, but I did work hard in the summers, and I had mentioned refereeing some basketball. I was a basketball official and a baseball umpire through that time, and that's what I did for a living during the school year, and always set my class schedule so that I was available to go do those things, and that's how I kept gas in the car and clothes on my back during that time.
Wow, that's awesome. There's a huge need right now for officials. I feel like they've had to, I know I'm from Western Illinois, but my mom said that there's been high school games canceled because they can't find officials.
Right. Yeah, we've canceled games in Neoga this year because of a lack of officials as well. So something that I dearly miss, and I do really credit a lot of my experience in officiating to my success in education. As officials, we worked very hard at trying to get better at what we were doing, and we took a lot of constructive criticism. And so I always thrived on evaluation from my superiors when I entered education, and I looked forward to that feedback that I was able to get from them. And I really think that helped to improve my skills early on in my career, and that's been a big benefit to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was thinking about earlier, did you ever do any coaching or anything?
Limited coaching.
Okay.
I did coach some track and field when I was teaching, and my first job I coached some junior high girls basketball. Nothing that was at a real high level.
Yeah.
Um, so that was really about it as far as coaching.
I was just thinking it's interesting that like a lot of people that are in education also have a tie somehow to sports and coaching or officiating. And I was trying to think about like what is that connection, but you just hit the nail on the head when you were talking about like that that criticism and
Mhm.
taking that and using it and thriving off of evaluation. Like I think that's so true. And it takes a while I think to be comfortable with hearing that all the time.
It
I
does.
mean, I don't have true official experience, but I was an intramural official at my undergrad university, and it gave me a whole new respect for referees, and I was just like, wow,
Mhm.
it's a different side of the game, a different perspective on
It is.
sports.
It is. You're right. Yeah.
That's awesome. So your first teaching job out of college, where was that at?
My first teaching job was in Shelbyville. Um, my wife and I were married in the summer of '88. I student taught that fall at Charleston Middle School. And so then that spring I started job searching, was hired to teach eighth grade English and literature at Shelbyville. My wife was then hired at Sullivan as a guidance counselor, and I spent 2 years there at Shelbyville. Those were really good years, and really appreciative that I had the chance to work in Shelbyville schools. It was a good experience for me.
What was something you learned in your first few years as a teacher?
Well, I had to learn to be creative for sure. The very first textbook that I picked up to use at Shelbyville was 17 years old. They were falling apart at the seams, so I had to grab resources wherever I could find them. Internet was not even prevalent at that time, so we didn't have Chromebooks to fall back on and that sort of thing. We had to create it on our own. Learning standards were basically non-existent at that point. So we really created our own programs. So I had to learn to be creative in those first 2 years, which is not something that comes easily to me. But it really helped me, I think, throughout the rest of my career.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't realize there weren't learning standards.
Well, it
That's
was just, I'm not going to say they weren't there,
right.
but the testing that we have now and the accountability measures that are in place were not available at that time.
Mhm,
So it was a very different setup at that
mhm,
point.
mhm. Okay, and then from Shelbyville, you went to Effingham, right?
Yes, I went to Effingham. I taught
Okay.
eighth grade English and literature in Effingham for 4 years as well. Those were good years. I did that. And then in the summer, oh boy, I'll get the years off here. About the summer of probably '94 or so, the superintendent at Effingham, Dr. Roberts, called me and said, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you tomorrow." We really didn't know what that was about. I was still pretty green, really only had 6 teaching years under my belt. Called me in one day in June and said, "Hey, the principal's job opened at Edgewood. Are you interested?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "How's this sound for a salary?" And I said, "I think it sounds great." And that was it. That was my interview for my first principal's job. So
Wow.
yeah, so it's kind of a whirlwind, and so yeah, I spent then 3 years at Edgewood, which is in the Effingham School District, or was at the time. Spent 3 years there, and then moved up to Effingham Central School, which was third, fourth, and fifth grade, and worked there for 6 years as an assistant principal.
Okay. And so was there any hesitation when he said like there's this principal opening? Were you like, I don't know, or were you just like, yeah?
Well, there's always that question, it's like being a parent. Are you ever really ready?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that I was ready at that time with only 6 teaching years of experience. But I knew that it was a great opportunity to start in a small school where it was going to be some part-time teaching and part-time principal. I thought it would be a good opportunity. It was a quality veteran staff at that school, and they really helped to mold me as a new principal as well. And so the opportunity was presented. I was afraid that opportunity might not be there again in a couple of years when I didn't feel like I was ready. So sometimes you have to just make that leap of faith, and that's what I did at that time.
Hmm. Was it a hard transition from teacher to principal, or was it pretty natural?
That transition was pretty nice because there was some teaching involved. I taught PE at Edgewood, even though I'm not a licensed PE teacher, and I taught gifted education at Edgewood. So I had a couple of days a week that I was a teacher as well. So that really eased that transition. I tell young aspiring principals all the time, it's a big jump. As a teacher, when you go in that classroom and you shut that door behind you, you have that class. And there are times that you walk into your principal's office and you shut the door to your office and you think, okay, now what am I supposed to do? Now, that's not just, I mean, the job is busy, but it's a different feel, and you do lose a little bit of relationship with kids. And that's something that you have to work at as a principal. You have to find those positives in your day and continue to work on building those relationships with kids. So that transition can be tough, but the way it worked out for me, that job at Edgewood was the fantastic way to transition into administrative life for sure.
Yeah, so true. Was that only an option because it was like such a small school that they needed you to do both?
Right. So at the time, it was a kindergarten through 4th grade building, just one section at each grade level. So there were only 5 grade levels there. It was a very small school. Really, it didn't take a full-time principal. Gifted education was really big at the time. So that was a program that needed to be offered. And I had gone and had a certification for teaching gifted education at the time. PE, I had a background in athletics, so they thought, oh, well, he can teach PE, which I learned very quickly. It's not just quite that easy.
Hmm.
But so yeah, so they just needed it saved them from having to send a PE teacher from all the way in Effingham, and the same with a gifted teacher. Now, about midway through my first year there, Effingham did close down a preschool building that basically was condemned. So we had some preschool classes that were added into the school about halfway through my first year there. So that added an additional workload, but I love seeing those 3, 4, and 5-year-old kids in the building every day. It was fantastic.
Yes, they're so fun. They're still
It,
so
it, it,
little. They
it
don't know
was a
how to
ride.
interact at school.
Yeah, yeah, it was good.
That's awesome. What a cool transition. I mean, that's like
Mhm.
ideal. And so then from there, you went to Ttown, right?
Yes, I went to Teutopolis. So I was a middle school major when I went through good old EIU, and love middle school age kids to this day. My favorite age, just always has been. Can't explain why. I just love building relationships with those kids. So the middle school principal, junior high principal's job opened up at Teutopolis. And I think that was the summer of '04. Ironically, I have a brother who was teaching at that building at the time. So when that job opened up, I thought, oh, this is the job that was meant for me. My brother was also my next door neighbor at the time.
Wow.
And so before I even applied, I went to him and I said, Steve, hey, your principal's job is open. What would you think if I applied? And his response was, I'm not in this business to worry about who my principal is. I'm in this business because those kids need me. And he said, if that's what you want to do, I think you should absolutely go for it. and I did. And it worked out well. And it was really, again, the 6 years that I spent at Teutopolis Junior High were 6 of the busiest years of my life, because I was there 4 or 5 nights a week, supervising events and taking fans' buses to ball games. But it was again, just they went faster than any other 6 years of my life as well.
Wow. It's crazy to me that you've been in all these different school districts. And the one question that I can think of is like, what do you do with all the merchandise you collect at each school?
I have a closet full. I have a closet full of that merchandise. I have medals from state tournaments in Teutopolis that were presented over the years. Just the clothing apparel, because there are fundraisers that are happening all the
Mm,
time. So yeah, I have a closet full of that kind of merchandise. It's kind of crazy.
I believe it.
So yeah.
And when you're kind of in the same area, like some of those schools are probably rivals. So it's like if you showed up in someone else's gear.
Absolutely. Well, even today at Neoga, if I wear a blue shirt and a gold tie to school, it doesn't take but about 15 minutes, and somebody says, Ttown colors today, huh? So I have to be very careful about how I even color coordinate nowadays.
Yeah, they're on to you. They'll
Yeah,
know.
that's right. That's right.
That's funny. And what do you think was so valuable about all of those different experiences? Um, and like, I guess, what would your advice be to other maybe educators who have the opportunity to go to different districts or even just talk to different districts?
Right. So I have always encouraged, especially when I was in Teutopolis, dealt with a lot of our students who wanted to go on and be teachers, and they might be in their first year or two at Lakeland or at Eastern, and they had to do observation hours, and they would come back and want to do observation hours in Teutopolis, and I would say, no, we're not going to let you back here to do your observation hours. You need to go experience what life is like in a different school. Those experiences can't be replicated. You need to see what life is like outside of the walls of the town you grew up in. Sometimes, it's always nice when kids want to come back, but I think those experiences just can't be replaced. So we have always encouraged students to go out, go see other schools, and if you want to come back home, that's great, but experience other places as well.
Yeah.
Teutopolis especially had a real unique demographic. About 85% of the kids there live with both parents, which is pretty uncommon in a public school setting. Currently, in Neoga, we deal with, a lot of kids that come from some low income situations, and that brings a set of challenges. So we always encourage the students at Teutopolis to go out and see what life was like in other places.
Yeah, that's such good advice because I think the temptation is to go back to what you're comfortable in. And
Mhm.
it's like when you grew up in that school, you know where the bathrooms are, you know where the
Right.
cafeteria is, like there's just a level of comfort in that. But I think it stretches you a lot when you have to go somewhere new. So I think
I
that's
think
really
that's
great,
correct.
great advice. So from there, you transitioned to superintendent, right?
That's correct. So I was in Teutopolis as junior high principal, and the superintendent at the time, Dan Niemerg, was going to be retiring. Um, School board had approached me about whether or not I was interested in that position, and I was at the time. I thought I was ready, and so we talked at the December school board meeting, and they offered the position to me. And so I spent 9 years as superintendent at Teutopolis, and I had a fantastic school board to work for in Teutopolis, and they were patient with me. We also had an experienced administrative team that made all the difference in the world too, allowed me to get my feet wet, and I'm sure I made mistakes, but they were kind and considerate when those mistakes were made, and we move forward. But in the end, a lot of great things, I think, that we accomplished there in 9 years. We saw a lot of change in that amount of time. Wasn't always smooth sailing. Went through some really difficult financial times and had to make some hard decisions. But I think we communicated well with the community, and the school board, had my back, and I had their back when we had to make some tough decisions. But in the end, some really good things happened there.
I like how you mentioned like all the other people that are involved, that it's never just one person making the decision, but it's like you and the school board and like even the community. I think that's really cool that you mentioned that because I think some people lose sight of that. And so that's good to hear. Um, what are the major differences between your role as a principal and your role as a superintendent? Like, what was that like?
Well, probably the biggest change is you really, as a superintendent, oftentimes become a business person as opposed to an educator. And growing up, professionally, growing up in education, we're not trained in business. Yes, I had classes as I, prepared in the superintendency program, but those just can't prepare you for dealing with insurance issues, for dealing with, the plethora of personnel issues that you have to deal with, payroll issues that you deal with. Those are all the sorts of things that you don't get into education for. You get into education because you're a people person, you care about people. And then when you have to make business decisions, those are really difficult at times. So I had a group of people in Teutopolis. It was called TCFP, Teutopolis Community for Progress. Some local business leaders that met twice a month. I sat down with them in those meetings. I learned a ton from those folks. The Illinois Association of School Business Officials participated regularly with that group, trying to learn the business aspect of the job. That's probably the biggest jump from going from a principal to a superintendent, is just learning the business side of the job. I had great help at Teutopolis, Norma Custer and Myra Prummer, two ladies who worked in the business office there. Lori Lohman was also there at the time that I went in as superintendent. Those ladies were so good at their jobs. They made things a lot easier for me, but so easy that they did a lot of the business functions. I didn't even have to learn them as well as I maybe should have. They were good, really good.
That's cool. Very cool. And so then you moved back to Neoga, right?
I did. So just about 3 years ago, Ben Johnson was the superintendent at Neoga, and Ben was leaving for Benton, Illinois. And so the job came open. One of the things that you find, and I had lived in Neoga for 30 years at that point. I'd lived most of my adult life here. It's my wife's hometown, and she was retired as a teacher from here. So when the job came open, I thought, I've always had to drive quite a ways to work. And sometimes in leadership positions, 9 years is a long time. You make some tough decisions, and not everybody is always in favor of those decisions that have to be made. And so sometimes a fresh start is a good thing. So I approached the Neoga School Board and said, hey, I have 3 years left. If that's something that would meet your needs, and if you think my skill set is something that could benefit you for the next 3 years, I might be available. It worked out, and it's been a great thing. It's a fantastic school board here at Neoga. Our staff is second to none here. It's just an incredible group of teachers that are selfless and work on behalf of students so hard every day. I couldn't be more proud of the work that they do up here. They had some good things going when I arrived, and it's really been my pleasure just to be able to keep those things moving forward and being a support for all of that.
Yeah, for sure. You guys were at the rural networking night, and
Mhm.
I think the way that you just described Neoga, that is like the impression I got, even just from your guys' table and the people you brought with
Mhm.
you. It was very
Right.
impressive and just engaging. And I think that it's just evident the type of school district that you guys are is
Right.
very
Yeah,
impressive.
we're really excited about the work we're doing. We are heavily committed to professional learning communities and the PLC process, and we provide that time for our teachers to meet twice a week in teams, whether it's grade level teams or subject area teams. Our principals, Kevin Harmon and Jordan Bear, are very committed to that. Mr. Harmon, by the way, is taking my place on July 1st to be the superintendent. And we have hired Jennifer Bridges to take his place. Mrs. Bridges is currently principal at Windsor Junior Senior High School, had a lot of years of experience here at Neoga as a teacher, and she's coming back home, so to speak.
Very cool.
But they're committed to that process as well. And we just are really excited about the things that we have going on here and what we're able to do for kids.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to hear you talk about um you said you lived in Neoga for most of your adult life.
Mhm,
And I know that like I mean, working in a rural school district, community is very important. Like
mhm.
they go hand in hand. You can't really separate the two. And so what's it like to end your career in this community and just surrounded by these people?
Well, it's just been a breath of fresh air for me. It's again a new perspective, a new way of looking at things. New systems in place. The whole PLC process and learning about that has been invigorating for me. That's one thing that I have also told young administrators. There's value in going to one job, one school district, and staying there your entire career, but there's also value in change. And I have found in my career, when I've changed positions, that change is intellectually stimulating in a lot of ways. I read more books in my first year in a new position. I attend more professional development. Just that learning is so fun and so energizing that there's a lot of value in change from time to time.
Hmm. That's so true. And speaking of that, you mentioned at the beginning of your career, technology really wasn't a part
Mhm.
of education too much. And now, technology is a huge part of education. And so, I guess, how have you embraced the role that technology plays within education?
Well, so personally, I've always been a person who tried to keep up with the technology as much as possible. When I was teaching at Effingham, really computers were just starting to become more commonplace in the home. And we had a payroll deduction program that was put in place at Effingham where we could purchase a personal computer for use at home. And I did that right away and tried to really stay abreast of what was going on with technology. Tried to use spreadsheets early on and get the full benefit of those as an administrator. When I was at Ttown, we started a one-to-one program there and a fundraising effort to raise the money to make that happen. The technology when I came to Neoga has just been amazing. They have done a fantastic job of keeping technology upgraded. But I've just always been a person who's not really been afraid to jump in and try things with technology. And I think that's the important thing. I can see that there is absolutely a role for technology to play in education, but I will argue as hard as I can, you can't replace the teacher in front of the classroom. And I think if we learn nothing else from last year in remote learning, we learned that we have to have teachers in front of kids, and that is critical to the success of our students. There's a role for technology, but it's a role.
Right. Yes, I
Yeah.
agree 100%. Very well said, too. Um, what is the greatest piece of advice you could give to those in education?
Always keep in mind what's in the best interest of kids. Um, it's so easy to say, boy, this would be easier for me, or this would be easier for my teachers, you can say as a principal, or this is easier for parents. But we have to think about what is best for kids. Sometimes that requires making some really tough decisions. And that's difficult to do because all of us want to do what's in the best interest of the adults, but that is not why we're in the business. And doing what's best for kids sounds cliche, but if we really want to do that, it's going to require us to make some very difficult decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Victoria Norton, the principal at Martinsville, she was on the
Mhm.
podcast a couple weeks ago, and she said the same thing. She was saying, like, don't forget your why. Like, don't forget that
Mhm.
you came into this career because of the kids, and
That's
if you're
right.
not here for that, like, you're not here for the right reasons. And
Correct.
I think you just said pretty much the same thing, and with different words.
Correct.
Do you have any impactful stories about a student over your years?
Well, no, not necessarily any one thing that stands out, but it's interesting. So, my bookkeeper here at Neoga is an ex-student of mine when I was teaching at Effingham, and she had mentioned to me a while back that she had gotten together with some of her high school classmates, and one of them said, "Hey, I'm a teacher, and Mr. Fritcher is the reason that I'm a teacher." So
Wow.
those are the kinds of things when you hear those stories, that's what keeps you going in education sometimes. And education is one of those careers that we don't always know when we're having an impact on a student.
Yeah.
We may not find out that we had an impact on somebody until we see that person 20 years later and they say, "Hey, I remember when you told me in class," or "I remember when you said," a certain thing. So those are the kinds of things. And when you see ex-students on the street and they stop you and they want to talk and say hi, those are the things that impact me. And sometimes as an administrator, you don't always, it's harder to tell when you're having that impact. Um, but I think when you get the opportunity to see kids being successful because, and you had a hand in that, that's what's impactful to me.
Hmm. Hmm. So true. Um, I guess, why have you stayed in rural schools? You've been to lots of different schools, but
Yeah.
all of them are rural areas, and so, like,
Right.
what's kept you in rural
Well,
schools?
you know, I'm rural. I grew up in a rural town. Really knew from early on that I wasn't going to get too far from home. I have no farming background. I have no background in the agriculture business at all. Can barely tell you the difference between a disc and a plow. That's about it. I know we plant soybeans and corn, um, but I'm just a rural guy. I enjoy the rural settings. I just knew early on that's where I wanted to be. There is something special about that let's pull ourselves up by the bootstrap mentality that a lot of us have in rural areas. And we're not the kind that are, "Hey, it's 10 below wind chill, let's not have school today." It's like, you know what, let's pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and let's go to work.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that attitude. I like that attitude. And that's what I like about living and being in a rural area, raising my kids in a rural area. I wanted that kind of attitude in them as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Very well said. Um, what are you going to miss about being in education? I'm sure you'll still be a part of it in some way in retirement, but what are you going to miss the most?
I'm going to miss just interaction with people. It's whether it's kids. I was walking down the hallway at the high school today, and there was a young man that I knew I needed to have a conversation with, and was able to put my hand on his shoulder, and just he's going through some tough times, and just let him know I'm there for him. He knows where my office is if he needs me. Same thing with the staff. I have absolutely dedicated my professional and much of my personal life to relationships with kids and staff members. And walking away from that is going to be tough because I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of hobbies. I don't referee the basketball anymore. I'm not much of a golfer, as much as I try to like it. I'm just not very good at it. So I'm not real sure, what kinds of hobbies await in retirement. And so just that interaction with people on a daily basis is going to be really tough to replace. So that's
Yeah.
something that I'll have to be looking for.
Yeah.
I've talked with the current principals about maybe doing some mentoring of some young folks here, whether it be at the elementary, maybe at the junior high level, and just offering my services, to do that, to be able to maintain some relationships with kids.
Yeah. That would be awesome. That was going to be my next question is what are you looking forward to in retirement? Are there
Right.
any other things besides that?
Well, I have one grandson who's about 16 months old and another one coming in April. And so there's going to be a whole lot of that, I hope.
Yes.
I will have to work a little bit. So my objective is to try to find a position that can utilize my experience in education to help provide a good student experience for kids in a school. But it's not going to be supervising people and making those tough decisions on a day-to-day basis. But I do want to find something that I can utilize the skill set that I've kind of honed over the years to help out a school somewhere. Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh my goodness. This was great. I feel like I wrote down you were talking about there's value in change. And I think that if there was a theme of this conversation, that was it for sure.
Mhm.
And I just think that you have so much wisdom and so many experiences to share. And so it's been really cool to just
Right.
hear about your journey. And yeah, so thanks for being a part of this.
Hey,
And
it's been my pleasure, Brianna. I'm thrilled to join you, and it's been an incredible 33 plus year journey, and it's time for some young minds and some fresh ideas to give it a shot. But it's been an incredible journey.